Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Revolutionizing Electrical Design in Revit with Evolve and Design Master. Today, we're joined by Evolve Product Manager Adam Heon, as well as Design Master President David Robinson. So today, we're going to start out with a quick overview of Evolve and how it works with Revit, and then we'll be showing you how you can improve electrical designs by leveraging the new Design Master plugin for Revit. We will be prompting a few questions throughout the webinar. The chat is open for people who want to submit their responses. We'll also have time at the end for a Q&A, so you can also use the Q&A function to submit your questions as they might come up throughout the webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be forwarded to all registrants, and you can always find more cool demos and videos, webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Adam Heon to kick things off.
Thanks, Marina. I'll share my screen. For those who don't know me, my name is Adam Heon. I'm a product manager for Evolve. I've been focused on our Revit products for the past 4 or 5 years since we've been out. So I wanted to give just a quick overview of Evolve. I know there's going to be a mix of some customers and some people who probably have not seen Evolve before. So real quick, Evolve is an add-in, for the construction part of the process for electrical contractors and mechanical contractors. For specifically electrical, we provide a series of content, families, basically a database of elements and things that you need to model with to get high level of detail models, and also to be able to quickly produce fabrication deliverables such as spool sheets, schedules, things like that. So as you go across this ribbon, you can see we have a whole slew of features and tools. Again, these tools are aimed to model faster, more accurately, enhance model data to give better schedules and information from the model itself, as well as some model management utilities to create custom automations based on your specific workflows. So as it relates to the topic today, with Design Master, for the electrical contractor, the core of a project comes with the distribution, the one line. Evolve, one of the first Evolve tools that was created for electrical specific, was the conduit run schedule. And the run schedule for any contractors, those who are contractors know, this is where you start. So the first feature we created was the ability to create a schedule before anything is modeled. Typically, these are being imported through Excel, as everybody has their own templates. But this allows you to get all this data into this project and then start to apply that data to the model and use it to track and really manage the distribution system in your model. So David and I connected a little while back, and David will go through Design Master in a minute here. But he's really taken the first step to kind of really translate all that data that's being generated on the design side and being able to pass this along down to the contractor. I mean, whether you're design build or handing it off, getting it from an engineer, this information is so valuable, and it takes time to develop it and recreate it by scanning through drawings and things like that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, David, and we can take it from here.
Great, thank you, Adam. So my name is David Robinson, and I'm president of Design Master Software. Just to give you a quick background on who I am, I'm not actually an electrical engineer or an electrical contractor. I got into this space because my dad is, and so I was writing software for his electrical engineering firm 20 years ago. And so in 2002, we released software that was at the time built on top of AutoCAD for electrical design. And then we've since added software that works inside of Revit. So over the course of those 20 years, I've had the immense pleasure of working with over 600 different electrical design firms, ranging from the small one-man consulting shop to the couple person design team and a design build contractor to large engineering firms. So we've seen a lot of different ways that people do their electrical design. And so we've taken everything that we've learned about what people do, and we've kind of tried to integrate that into what our software is doing. So I want to walk you through kind of our workflow or our model for how we think about electrical design, show you how that works in our software, and then show you what Adam teased a little bit at the end there, where we can take what you're doing in your design and actually move it over to the contracting side. I'm going to share my screen here. And I want to ask a quick question before we jump into the software, which is, what is the hardest part for you about creating single line diagrams in Revit? So think about the single line diagrams that you're using. And what is the hardest part that you have there? I'm trying to see my chat. I can't get my chat to go to everybody. All right, I'm going to just host some panelists right now. Hopefully your website chat is working and you can give me an answer there in the chat as to what kind of challenges you have. Hopefully you are doing single line diagrams, or there's someone in your company doing in single line diagrams, because that's where our software is going to be the most interesting for you. So the way we think about design is we have what we call the electrical design triangle. And so the electrical design triangle has three sides to it. The first side down here at the bottom is your Revit model. So we are doing work in Revit. So we're talking about Revit. That's where everything's happening. So you've got the Revit model where you're laying out your panels. We also have the single line diagram. And that is where obviously you're laying out your panels, making the connections not working, make your connections connect to each other between your panels and your transformers. That's usually going to be done in a drafting view or in AutoCAD. So you've got that separate piece. And then we finally got the calculations over here. Where you've got your wire sizing. Oh, right, chat's working. It wasn't working before. I didn't think it was, but it is working. I do want to ask the question again, what is the hardest part about creating single line diagrams? Or are you creating them? If you're not creating them, and say, hey, we don't do single lines. That's a relevant answer in the chat as well. Patrick, thanks for playing along. He says content that doesn't correspond back to the model. Putting all the parameters automatically, coordinating with your panel schedules, coordination. Yeah, so those are all of the troubles that we have. Linking the model to the one line, moving from AutoCAD to Revit, creating them inside Revit is the hardest. All right, so going back to my iPad here, that's where we've got this single line diagram here. And we've got all of these problems that we have here, where we're trying to link this into, even getting it into Revit when you're working in AutoCAD. You make a change in the single line diagram and you have to push that change into your Revit model. You resize a panel in your single line, that's just some text, and then you have to go to the Revit model and resize it there. And that also has implications in the calculations. You resize a panel, you need to update your calculations. You go into your Revit model, you change a panel name. You need that panel name to update on the single line diagram. You need that panel name to update in your calculations. If you're working in your calculations, you see you've got a wire that the voltage drop is over the 3%. You need to resize that wire for voltage drop. You make a change, you have to push that change to the single line diagram and to the Revit model. So you've got these three separate models. You've got what's happening in your Revit model itself. You've got the single line diagram, which maybe is a drafting view, maybe is over in AutoCAD, but it's not linked. And then you've got your calculations. You're either doing those in Excel, or you've got Easy Power or ETAP or SKM. You've got one of those. And so every time you make a change, you have to go back and make those changes between these other pieces. So a change in one place has to be made in the other. And you're always constantly either back checking, just spending lots of time on QA and QC, or you're not. And then you're spending your time with change orders or dealing with these problems in the field where you don't get these things updated. So you can link all these manually and kind of do what we've been doing for 20 years, where you've got these 3 separate models and you're making your changes in all of them manually. Or we put together a tool, Design Master Electrical, that sits on top of Revit and pulls these 3 things together for you automatically. So the tool is Design Master Electrical RT. We've been around since 2013. We've won a number of awards. We just won Product of the Year for Consulting Specifying Engineer. So I have to call that out because that was just announced a couple days ago. So we're pretty excited about that. But we've been around. We are constantly getting accolades for what our software is doing in Revit to take these 3 pieces and put them together. When you're using software like this and actually integrating your things, you can see savings on a project of 65% of your design time. It can cut your design time in half. Thinking about those 3 sides of the triangle on the Revit model, you're still working in Revit. So you're doing your panels and transformers in Revit. You're doing your light fixtures, your motors, your circuits, your panel schedules. Revit still handles all that stuff. Over in our software, we actually take over the breaker sizing and the wire sizing. Revit has those. They don't work all that well. So we take it over, and then in Revit, we're handling that. For the single line diagram, we do that in a drafting view in Revit with detail items that are linked to your model families, so that changes in one are going to be reflected in the other, that you don't have this separate single line diagram that's not coordinated with your model, that they're actually a coordinated thing where changes are happening. And then finally, we pull the calculations into Revit. You're no longer stepping outside to Excel or some of these other third-party programs. You're using our software to do your breaker sizing, to do your wire sizing, but also voltage drop calculations, short circuit analysis, arc flash, selective coordination, all of that happening inside of Revit based upon your Revit model, based upon the single line, so that it's one single model rather than these 3 separate pieces. We can take a quick look at how that works in Revit here. So I've got a single line diagram. And if we come take a look at this diagram here, we've got this panel LP1A. We run our highlight device command. You can see that it knows it's the same panel on the Revit model. So there's actually a link there between what we're doing in our single line and what's happening in our Revit model. And then we can take just the simplest example possible. Say you have to change a panel name. For whatever reason, you want to update how your panels are being labeled. We have an LP1B in this project. So let's say we're going to call this LP1A to kind of have a consistent naming scheme. And then maybe we actually need to change the size of this panel. This is currently 100 amps. We're going to upsize it to a 200 amp panel. So we can do that through our interface. And then you can see here, there's now an LP1A. It's been updated in your Revit model. If you select this panel, it's now a 200 amp bus over here in the mains. Then you would normally have to go over to your single line diagram and update all that as a kind of a second step. Our software takes care of that for you. So it's now LP1A. It's a 200 amp panel. It has a 200 amp breaker. It has a 200 amp feeder. So the software knows all those changes needed to be made when you upsize that panel. If we go take a look at the panel schedule for MDP1, find that in my panel schedules here. It knew to upsize, to change that name here as well. So we've got LP1A. It's now a 200 amp panel there as well. So we're having all of this linked together so that changes in one are happening in the other. And there's a comment there. It didn't change the type. And the reason for that is that this is a poorly defined model that is the default from Autodesk. So these types are not linked as well as we would like them to be. We have some features and functionality that if you want to have those sizes linked a little bit tighter to what's happening in the model, you can. But this 125 amp, that's really just a label there. So if you want your types linked up, we have ways to do that within the software. But they're not linked in this project. And so we can have it linked so that when you change your size, it'll update what's happening in our software. Again, update what's happening here. So that actually can happen with a slightly better put together model than what Autodesk ships as their sample project. Then we also have the calculations happening as well. So if we go take a look at voltage drop, we can see here, we've got a panel, it's over 3% voltage drop. We can use our software to upsize the wire. And it's actually the feeder upstream of it that really needs to be upsized. We can go to this panel. It's currently 250 kc mil wire. We can change that from 250, we'll upsize it to 350 kc mil. And then we're going to run a calculation. The calculation takes a moment. We don't do it automatically because if we did, you'd then be asking, well, how do I turn this off? Because if it did this much calculation every time you made a change, that wouldn't work very well. So we do the calculations, as requested. So you make a bunch of changes in your project and then we update things. You can see that, okay, now we've got 2.77% voltage drop here. But again, we go back to the single line diagram. We just changed the wire size. That needs to be reflected here. So we've got that new wire size being called out. Breaker's still 250 amps, but it's now a 300 amp wire. And those new voltage drop values are being reflected on the single line diagram as well. So all of the changes you make in one place are being reflected everywhere else. And again, just so that you kind of understand the breadth of the calculations we have, it's not just voltage drop. We also do the fault. So we do a short circuit analysis. So the fault at these panels now reflects that new wire size. We also can do arc flash if you're doing that for any of your projects. And we also have selective coordination if you need your breaker curves. So all of that is included in the software inside of Revit. Now going back to our electrical design triangle here, we've been looking at kind of the engineering side. So we've got our electrical design triangle with our three sides, the Revit model, the single line diagram, and the calcs. And this is all engineering. And then over here, we've got contracting. And it's kind of a separate space because what you're doing when you're doing contract, when you're on the construction side is a little bit different than engineering because you're obviously at that point very concerned about the actual routing of the conduits. The people on the design side don't want to think about those sorts of things because they need to be working at a different level. So we don't work over here. Engineers, we work with a lot of like design bid engineers where they're not working with the contractors. So over here is essentially their bee dragons. So here's my dragon for you. It's got wings and maybe some fire. So that's the dragon. And so we don't really work over there because we don't want to be thinking as engineers on design side about how all of those calculations or about how you're laying out your conduits and whatnot. Instead, what we have put together is a transfer of just a little bit of data across here for the conduit run schedule, where we can take what we've done on the design side, give it to Evolve, and then let Evolve handle that. Because Evolve is great software on the construction side, and we don't want to work on that or try and integrate that into what you're doing on the design side. Because if the engineers had to worry about how their conduits were being routed, the software would very quickly become overwhelming. So we just transfer that over to Evolve. And the way that works is that we go to our Evolve command, we run this, and it's going to export all of that information to an Excel file. And then in Evolve, we can go to the conduit run schedule command, and we can import that. So now Design Master is creating your conduit run schedule for you, and it pulls everything in, and it knows how everything's connected because you did that on your design. It knows all your conduit sizes because it's pulling those from the design work that you did when you were laying everything out. So we have all of those conduit sizes. We can put all the wire sizes in here as well. So everything from your design side and Design Master is then put into Evolve. And then from here, you can take it and do your standard work with Evolve, not having to create this. And if you then make any changes, you can export again and upload this with any changes that you have from our software. So that is what our software does. And that is how we link with Evolve. Are there any questions on that? Adam, did you want to show anything about how you would take that? I think you probably covered enough there. But that is
Yeah,
what
if
we
any
were doing.
questions, yeah, if any questions come in, I can certainly show kind of the next steps with Evolve. But yeah, see what comes in.
If I showed you all that, and that's what our software does. No one is going to make a purchase of our software based upon this short presentation. I do know that the next step for all of you is you need to actually look at this software, and there's really two ways you can do that. We're going to put a QR code up in a moment, which has links to all these. You can also just click on these links here. You can schedule a workflow review with me where I can sit down with you and your design team, talk about what our software does, how our calculations work, and see if it's going to be a good fit for what you're doing in Revit. You can also just download a free trial and try it yourself. You can just get it, start playing with it, and see how it goes. And then the where we link up, there's going to be a QR code or a coupon code as well. That for anyone on this webinar, just as a thank you for taking the time to look at what our software is doing and see how it can help you. It's a 25% off coupon code for anyone who's on the webinar to help make that transition a little bit easier. So that as you're trying out new software, you're not having to put out quite as much money while you evaluate the software. So that is what I have. Marina, I don't know if you want to throw up that QR code now, and if there are any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we can answer them. There is one question from Patrick. Do you need to update the conduit standards and wire standards to match what you imported? That is a good question, because Evolve obviously has its set of conduit sizes and Design Master has its own. And so we have essentially a link to make those work, because Evolve is pulling really from Revit. And then our software, we've got our own custom conduit sizes. And what we do is we make sure that any of our conduit sizes have a corresponding size in Revit, which then Evolve is using. So that's how that transfer works. And as long as the conduit sizes match in the two programs, everything kind of works out. If it doesn't match, then you need to obviously resolve that, because we do need the same conduit sizes in order for things to work. Another question from Benjamin. If the engineer didn't create his one line in Revit and linked it with Design Master, there's still a way to transfer the data to the contractor? You could. This isn't necessarily what we're envisioning with the workflow, but this command here, this export, just depends on the panels being in Revit and them being connected in Revit. So it would properly export the connections. So going back to what we have in the conduit run schedule here, the start and the finish would be correct, because we would be able to pull that from the Revit model. If you didn't use Design Master, these conduit sizes would not be correct. So you would need to go back and update those to be the right value. But if you just want to export your list of panels, you could do that from Design Master without actually having used it. So it's not dependent on the engineer using that, though that's really kind of our intended workflow, is that you'd be using ours for the whole design so you get the conduit sizes. Is there a good workaround for the foresight error?
Oh, I just answered that. I think that's referring to the project error that occurred. So yeah, I just responded, Kate, to you. I'll reach out directly on that, on how to correct that error.
All right.
So a couple, oh yeah, do you see those other ones
Yeah.
there?
Let's see. We answered that one. We answered that one. Question, does Design Master for AutoCAD integrate with Design Master for electrical? So we actually have two separate programs for anyone who's not familiar with our company background. We have stuff that works in AutoCAD. We have stuff that works in Revit. They are separate packages. So we don't have anything to go from AutoCAD to Revit to Evolve or anything. So this is strictly looking at our Revit integration. Next question, do you have MC sizes? We do. I don't know that we don't have them in here. We don't have them built in as our standard customization, but we have extensive customization available where you can set your wire sizes and your conduit sizes. So if you need other things, you can come in here and add to the list of what we have, because we realize that what you're going to be using while there's common things, it's not always going to match what everybody else is using. So you can come in here and you can customize it for what you need to use for your projects. So if there's ever anything missing, it can be added through our customization. Is the Design Master schedule bi-directional, so you can change data in the schedule and it will modify the parameters associated with the modeled element? That's a good question. All of our information is being exported as a shared parameter. So it shows up here as a shared parameter on the device. Actually, if I come here, and then you can create all your schedules, the voltage drop schedule, the conduit schedule, fault schedule are being created based upon this. You don't make changes here though. So if you come in here and you type in a new wire size, that's not going to work. You actually need to go into our software, go into our panel edit command, make the change there. And then our software knows that you made the change and can go make it everywhere and update everything. So it's not bi-directional in that sense. You don't make the changes in your schedules. You always go back to our ribbon, our interface, and make the change there. And then it knows that that was a change that you meant to make and to get it right. Because Revit's a little limited in what they let you do with your shared parameters. So we've got a lot of stuff going on where if you made a change, it wouldn't be clear if that was an intended change or if it was one of our various options. So we have to make the change through our interface. Is there equivalent of this for the receptacles to and from information? There is not. So this is a brand new integration. We just came out with this a couple weeks ago. And so we're kind of collecting feedback. And so we started with the feeders because that seemed like the obvious first place to start. We are getting a little bit of feedback, including this here, that maybe it'd be useful to have this for the branch circuits themselves, that you want to have conduits and wire sizes for the branch circuits. So we don't have that currently. It's something that is kind of on our radar as something to expand the integration to include. So not yet, but potentially in the future.
Yeah, and just on that topic, on the Evolve side, there's more that we will be doing regarding branch and managing circuitry for Evolve. So there's definitely that is a focus of ours in the near future. So there's going to be as we develop these things, we can further develop how this integrates. I think it's going to work really well together as we move forward.
Yeah, the next question is similar. Is this limited to panels or can be implemented to run calcs for motor loads or elevators? So on the exporting of the conduit sizes, we are not doing it for motors or elevators currently. However, all of our calculations are working on the branch circuits. So we can give you the fault on a branch circuit. So if we go take a look at this cooling tower, which is my favorite cooling tower in this project, you can see that we are calculating the fault at that device. So we can have our fault at our piece of equipment. We can have the voltage drop there so that for your larger pieces of equipment, you can do the calculations there. Next question, do you have panel schedule templates that look at the Design Master parameters? We do not have our own templates. So you still use the Revit panel schedules, and we have our own parameters, but you do need to load our parameters into your templates. We don't have our own templates that you can use that have our parameters preloaded. Generally, we found that most people have their own panel schedules. They don't really want to switch over from those to ours. So it's easier to modify theirs rather than to use ours. So most of our parameters are using what you already have in Revit. And then the stuff that we have, you do need to make some changes to your templates to link up with what we have. Another question, does Design Master RT work well with PV projects? Oh, and there's another good question here, but so for the PV projects, we don't do a whole lot for that. All of our calculations are kind of downstream of what you're doing for the solar and then the PV design. So we're not really doing anything on that side, is the answer. Then the next question, which is something I forgot to do in my little demo. How is this one line created? I mean, this looks really cool and all, but how did I actually get to here? We can either create it, if you put your devices in Revit, we can then create the one line from it, or you can actually create the one line and have the devices in Revit created. So I have a whole section here that's not generated yet. So I can run our generate one line command, and I can select this panel, and it's going to create all of these panels downstream of it for us on the one line. So all those panels exist in the Revit model. They haven't been inserted on the one line. It'll do its, a first pass of where they belong. They're never going to be exactly how you would draft it if you were doing it manually. You can go back and adjust it, but it gets everything in there, and then you can start working from here. So it'll lay out those panels, get the feeders inserted. So it'll build out that portion. So that's if you have the stuff in Revit already. You can have it generated. You can also place it one piece at a time. However, a lot of times, you're starting with your one line. You don't even have a Revit model. You don't have your equipment yet. That's kind of the standard workflow. Is the first thing you do is you create your one line. In that case, you can actually create your devices directly on the one line here. So I can create panel P new. It's going to be a 480 volt panel. You can select the graphic. So you have to select the family that's going to show up on in Revit. You have to choose the graphic that's going to show up on the one line. I can put this panel in. I can connect it to another panel. So you can start building out your one line, just drafting it on the one line without thinking about your model. If we go highlight this device, you'll see that it actually did create it in Revit, and it put it off in space because we don't know where it goes yet. You might not even have an electrical room. So we just kind of put them out in space. That way you have them available. And then when you finally do get a plan from the architect, you can start placing these panels where they belong. But this way you're building out your single line and your Revit model at the same time, so that they're all nicely linked, so that when you start moving these panels to where they belong, they're linked up with your single line still. So those are the two workflows we have for actually creating this. I don't know what your single lines look like, but I know they don't look like this. Everyone's graphics look a little bit different. So these graphics are all customizable. We're using standard Revit families. It's just using Revit to adjust what these graphics look like. So if you have different labels, you have different graphics, don't get too hung up on what we've got here. We can adjust to match your current standards. We have to have something that's going to make everybody angry because no one's looks the same. So I realize you probably wouldn't publish something that looks like this, but we can get something that's pretty close to what you've got today. Will the Evolve panel families work with Design Master as well as other Evolve families? They will, because our software is not dependent on any specific families for the plan view. Most engineers come to us, they've got their own families, they've been using Revit for quite a while. They're not going to switch to our families, and we understand that. So rather than try and come out with our own families, we just work with whatever you have. So our family, we work just fine with these families. There is some ability to add a little additional information to make them work better, but you can do that with your existing families. So the Evolve families are going to be exactly the same as anyone else's families in Revit. They're going to work with our software. What parameters are used for the voltage drop calculations? Is there a process that allows utilizing conduit lengths from Evolve feeders and allows adding an additional wire makeup length? We currently do not pull the wire lengths back from Evolve. That's been another request. We haven't done that yet. That's something that we're kind of gauging the interest before we do the development effort to do it. But the idea is that, yeah, maybe we pull the conduit lengths back from Evolve. Right now, we calculate the wire lengths based upon the location of the devices in Revit. And we've got a couple different options. You can do a right angle calculation. You can do a straight line. You can just type in the number if you don't want Revit to calculate it for you. And then we have a number of different makeup options to account for the wire going up to the ceiling and back down. So we've got a lot of different options. These are definitely engineering lengths and not contractor lengths. So don't cut wire, please, based upon these values. But for the engineering side, for fault and for voltage drop, they're good enough that they're going to give you correct answers with as many other assumptions as there are in those calculations. And then eventually, we would like to be able to pull the values back from Evolve so that these are being filled in with the actual conduit routes that you trace. Right now, if you did want to do that, if you have a particularly long run and you want to take into account the exact length, that's where the fixed length comes in, and you can just type it in and say, hey, I have this value from Evolve, I can manually type it in. Clearly, that's not the best workflow because you're having to manually transfer data. We're trying to avoid that, but it is an option today to allow you to do that. And then in the future, we do hope to be able to pull those values from Evolve. I'm going to throw those two links in the chat again. If you do want to schedule a workflow review, you can click on that there. If you want to just download the software, you can click on that. I see, Juan, you've scheduled a workflow review for next week. Looking forward to that. Be happy to show you the software. If anyone else wants to schedule one, feel free to click on that link. I'd be happy to walk you through the software, show you what it does, talk about your Revit workflow, and see how that's going to integrate what we can do for you, and see how you're using Evolve, and see how it can be helpful taking the data from your design to Evolve for you. Are there any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We use Easy Power for calculations and coordination. How does Design Master get the data from Easy Power? So you would be using Design Master instead of Easy Power. So going back to the electrical design triangle, over here in the calculations, you're using Easy Power. The idea with our software is that Design Master would replace it, and you would do the calculations there instead. I'm not going to say we can do 100% of what Easy Power can do, but we can do probably 90% and certainly 100% of what you need for a standard commercial project. So for the most part, you don't need to leave Design Master to do any additional calculations. You just do them in Revit using our software instead of Easy Power. And then for the few cases where you do need to, okay, you still have to step outside to Easy Power. Something like that has a little bit more calculation ability to it. So there are times where you might need to redo the model in Easy Power, essentially. But our goal is to avoid that as much as possible so that everything is happening inside of Revit, inside of Design Master. And that does include the selective coordination, that we can actually do those breaker curves in our software. Let me assign a breaker curve to this panel. This is MVP3. So we've got the list of breakers. You choose your curve, you give it all the settings. And then we can insert that curve on a drafting view in Revit. That's MVP3. And so there is your curve for that breaker. And it's actually more interesting if you put in two curves. So we'll do actually LP3, because that makes sense. And then we're going to assign a curve to it as well. For something more interesting, we'll come here, give it a thermal magnetic curve. And then we edit that graph, put in LP3. And then you've got your two curves. They're not coordinated, so you have to go back and adjust that. So you can do all this in Revit, and the idea again is that you're doing all of this in Revit based upon your Revit model rather than doing Easy Power at all. How does the licensing of Design Master work for your Revit versions? The way it works is that it is a per user license, and it's for each, that is a per person. So you can use it on any computer you happen to be at. So if you've got your work computer, you got your home computer, your laptop, that's not an issue. That's one user. But it does then support every version of Revit that you have. So we actually, if you really want to, have software that works in Revit 2014. It doesn't have all these features because we have stopped updating that. Most of these features work back to Revit 2019. That is frozen, but it has the one lines. And then like the generate, I believe is Revit 2021. The Evolve integration is probably Revit 2021. But the way our software is licensed, it's a per user license and it works on all your versions of Revit. So that, we realize you've got projects in multiple versions because that's just how life works. So we support them all, and we're not going to charge you for each different version of Revit that you're using. Can Design Master Electrical export tables of breaker settings like what would be needed for a power study report? We don't at this very moment. We are currently developing that so that we can actually export these. They're essentially going to be shared parameters that end up on the panels, and then you can schedule them in Revit. So right now, the only place we export the settings are here in these graphs, but we're going to export them as a separate shared parameters so that you can then schedule them for things like power study reports and whatever else other purpose you have for them. Can I expect the same level of quality assurance as ETAP for your protective device libraries? So I don't know what they do, but you can depend on us to have quality calculations and quality curves. We do have to load the curves for you. It's not something that you can do, but you contact us if there's a curve that's missing, and we'll get it in there and we'll make sure that it's right. That's part of what we're doing. And in terms of the calculations, our calculations are going to match what you get out of ETAP or SKM or anything else. I will warn you, the first time you run a calculation, you compare us to whatever you're doing right now, it will be different. And the reason it's going to be different is that you're going to model it differently in the two programs. So when that happens, don't be alarmed. Just go back, check all your numbers and make sure that, okay, you've actually have this modeled the same. If you can't figure out where it's different, contact us and we can figure it out with you. We can help you figure out where the differences are. Once you get them modeled the same, you will get the same values. Does Design Master have an Arc Flash label template? We do actually print Arc Flash stickers. Let's see if this works. It sometimes complains about where it goes. But we can print the stickers. We print 4 to a page on an 8.5 by 11. So that you can just, if you have sticker paper, you can run it through your regular printer, and then you have 4 stickers, and you kind of got to chop them up. If you have a label printer that you need formatted for, you can contact us and we can get the formatting to match your label printer. We haven't had a whole lot of requests for that, so we don't have a whole lot of support for any different label printers right now. But if you did want to have if you have a label printer and you want us to support that format, let us know. But this is our default out of the box that will work on an 8.5 by 11 for anybody if you need it. So we can create the Arc Flash stickers. What do most people use to draw with? The native Revit conduit. That's kind of getting into the conduit stuff. And for our integration, the assumption is that you're using Evolve. I don't 100% actually know how that all works. That's probably a question for Adam in terms of what they're doing. But the idea is that you'd be using Evolve for your conduits and using our software to link the conduit sizes.
Yeah, Evolve will use basically native Revit conduit, and then what the difference is, we have custom bend families for modeling bends like offsets, kicks, and things like that. But it's based on basically native Revit conduit.
Is the default Arc Flash label editable, or do we need to contact Design Master to configure custom labels? It is not editable. So if you need something custom or different, you would need to contact us for that. So if that is an issue, just let us know and we can take a look at that. So that's how you handle that.
All right, we have about 15 minutes left. So if there are any more remaining questions, now is the chance to get them in.
And this is from the comments. This isn't from me. It's seconded. Aaron and Kate are both saying DM support is fantastic. So thank you for saying that. I do appreciate that. We do try and set a very high bar for our support. So I appreciate that you guys are seeing that. We try to make sure that when you have questions, you are getting actual answers from people who actually know what they're doing.
All right, looks like we got another question in.
There we go. Thank you. How are DM load calcs set up? Does it use native Revit? Can you customize it? We don't do anything on the load size. So all of that is being handled by Revit right now. So it's just standard Revit loads. All of that is still handled by Revit. We don't touch it. And then we take those loads and use them for our voltage drop calcs. So we're not doing anything on the load side. That is all still handled by Revit. So we don't do anything there. There's lots of things that we would like to do. And it's something that, at some point we'd like to address. But right now, that's all still handled by standard Revit. Any other questions about the software? Anything you'd like to see it do? We do get asked about BIM 360 fairly frequently. We do support BIM 360 because we're working inside of Revit. So Revit essentially is doing all of the heavy lifting there. So there's really nothing special about our software in that regard, but to the degree that your projects work in BIM 360 today, they will continue to work when using our software. Does the one line support other Revit categories, electrical fixtures? It does. By default, we are just kind of working with the electrical equipment, but this CTP, this is actually that cooling tower again. So if we highlight this, you can see that it is linked to that cooling tower. So when you make your connections, when you run the insert link on the one line, it's just listing your panels. However, we have the select from model. So if you want to put something else on there, you can use select from model. So we can come over here. If I go to my 3D model and say we want to put in one of these receptacles, we can run the insert link, select that receptacle, and we'll use some sort of disconnect graphic, a little junction box. We can place it here on the one line. I have no idea what panel this is connected to, so good luck with the feeder, and we'll see what happens. It's way over there. So it's connected to that panel. Probably not where you'd want to put that, but that is now connected to that receptacle. So you can link anything, any of your electrical stuff to the one line. So we kind of work with the panels by default, and then any fixtures you have to indicate this is a fixture I want to have. When you generate selective coordination curves, it's possible to include transformer inrush and cable damage curves. We do not have those in the software, so we don't have any transformer or the cable damage curves. We are showing just the breaker curves right now. Question on the feeder lengths. So all the feeder lengths, we're pulling from the location of devices in the model. If you move pieces around, we recalculate for them. You can show them on the one line as well. I'm not sure what your question on the feeder lengths is, but if you take a look at this feeder, we have the length specified here, somewhere in here. It's currently pulling, oh, it's pulling 0 because it just put this in, it hasn't been recalculated. If we go to this one, we've got the circuit length being displayed there. Can we relink the one-line detail family if the panel got deleted in the model? You can. So if something doesn't exist anymore, the software will kind of highlight it and say, hey, do you want to link this? And you can run our change link command to point it to a different panel. So that's how you kind of redo those links. So we have the links that are created automatically when you insert stuff, and then you can update them if you need to. How much overhead does the DM toolset add to the Revit process? I mean, our ribbons themselves are not going to be adding anything. They get loaded in just like any other ribbon. The software, our software runs as well as Revit runs. So if you have a huge project and everything on that Revit project is slow, our software is included in that everything. But you're not going to see any specific slowdown related to Design Master. So we run as well as Revit is running. So there's not going to be any change in how Revit's running on your system. Do we have an extensive list of specific breaker and fuses? We do. It's a pretty extensive list. That feature has been included for 4 or 5 years. We've been adding breakers over that time based upon what we found to be popular and what customers are requesting. So it's a pretty extensive list. If you ever find something that's not there, you contact us and we can get it added. But generally, you're going to find that your breakers are going to be in there. Follow-up question: would the Revit conduit schedule become transferable to the Evolve conduit schedule? Yes. So the idea is that if anything I'm talking about with our conduits is the idea is that you might be able to create a feeder, a conduit schedule that includes branch circuits and then take that over to Evolve. So we don't have anything on that yet, but the idea with the conduit run schedules, anything that we're doing is that would be to transfer to Evolve, because the conduit run schedule just for our design software isn't all that interesting. So it's always a transfer over to Evolve. And then can you show us how feeder lengths are calculated? I can give you a brief overview. On our website, we have a number of trainings. So if you ever go to support, if you go to our online training, every month we do a training about some topic. If we go to our recordings, I've got a training here on wire lengths in Revit. And this is a deep dive into how wire lengths are calculated. And it's a 20-minute training. So I'm not going to do a whole 20-minute training for you right now because we will run out of time. So we've got a lot going on with how to calculate a wire length. But the basic idea is that we're using the positions of the devices in Revit to calculate those lengths. So if we take a look at this LP1A, we use the location of the upstream panel MDP1, and then how you're specifying you want that length calculated, either right angles or straight line. And then we have the wire length makeup. So the panel's down here. So right angles is going to be this way, and then this way. Excuse me, the straight line is a straight line between the two, and then any elevation change. But if we move this panel, we will get a new feeder length, and I should make a note of what that feeder length is before I move it. So currently it is seeing 195 feet. If we take this panel and we move it over here to this, and then we take a look at that panel in the panel edit again, it is now 180 feet. So we moved it in the model and it used that new location to calculate that length. And so if there's any elevation change, we'll see that. We've got the wire makeup that's just additional length added. So if it's in a tall ceiling, if you want to add 20 feet, you can do that. And then it'll update. So we've got all those options there for calculating the length. So there's a lot of different options. And again, these are engineering lengths. These are not Evolve lengths. They're not contractor lengths. The feeder lengths are then carried over to Evolve. So the ones that we calculate do show up in the conduit run schedule as the estimated length somewhere over here.
You may have to right click on the header there and say column chooser.
Column chooser, thank you. Where is it? There it is, column chooser.
And double click there on estimated length. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so we fill in our values and I clicked OK, so that disappeared because that wasn't doing what I thought it was. But we fill in the estimated length with the values from our software. So this is what our software thinks they are. They're obviously not the modeled values. Those are being provided by Evolve. But we do export those if you want to have them in your feeder schedule.
And on the Evolve side there, we do have through the Evolve reports a mechanism to compare estimated versus modeled. So you could always run a report after this once everything is updated to compare those.
Yeah. And then if you really, if there's any that are way off on a feeder where it's going to matter, you can then pull that back into Design Master with a fixed length at the moment. For everyone sticking around one last time, if you do want to schedule a time with me, click that top link and we can talk about what you're doing in Revit. and what our software does and how that workflows can work together. You can also download the software using the free trial link there as well. So feel free to schedule a time, or take that link, go back to your team, figure out a time that works for everybody, and you can schedule that later if that works as well.
I want to say thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar today. We hope that you found the information valuable. Please make sure that you're following Evolve and Design Master on social media to keep up with all of our upcoming webinars, trainings, and updates. Make sure to follow David's links in the chat to learn more about Design Master. And you can always find more demos and past Evolve webinars on our YouTube channel. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and we'll send out the recording to all registrants. If we have not been able to answer your question today, our team can reach out and be in touch with you. Thanks again, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day.